Good afternoon, everybody. I think I have spoken to most of you, but except you. And good morning to the two of you online as well. Welcome. My name is Rikke Christensen. I work here as Qmed as a senior principal advisor. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the clinical evaluations. First of all, let me give you a short recap of my background. I am originally, I have a master's in molecular biology back in the days. And I have worked with medical devices since the mid-90s in regulatory as well as clinical. Part of the work I have done is writing tons of clinical evaluation reports on a wide variety of products. On top of that, I have also worked for the competent authorities, so I have tried sitting across the table, working from that point of view, understanding a little bit what the competent authorities think and the way that they work. And now I work at Qmed. Part of what I do is clinical evaluations. I also work as a technical assessor for notified bodies reviewing clinical evaluations. So I still, get that point of view on these reports. So I have 15 minutes, so what I'm going to do is try to give you a short presentation on part of the clinical evaluation report process. One of the things that we have to document in the clinical evaluation report is how we appraise the data. And by that we mean sort of evaluate the data and give it a rank depending on how good is this data. There's lots of different ways of doing this, but I will try to present the engineer approach to this. That can be used to sort of, it can help to put this into boxes, basically. And that way to sort of, once you have that process under your skin, it can make it easier to do that selection based on the quality of the data. Many literature or clinical evaluation reports are based on literature. Even the ones that are doing clinical studies are almost always using literature as well. I have rarely seen a clinical evaluation report without literature in it. So the literature search is sort of the key in many clinical evaluation reports. When you do a literature search, you need to identify, you have to have a strategy. What are you actually going for in this report? What are you trying to document? And that needs to be done in close cooperation with other parts of the organization in the company. What kind of claims are you going to do for these products once they hit the market? What are markets going to sell it for? What do we know? What are the risks? What does the instructions for use state? All of this needs to be identified, and based on that you have to write up your protocol, your search protocol. You have to find out how you find the literature, and then you're going to analyze it afterwards. And all of this search can be a little bit tricky. There's a qualification requirement in this, that you need to have some kind of knowledge on how to do this. But once I will try to show you some slides here on how one way of doing it, basically. So you have to identify, when you start your search, you have to identify the product. Basic, very basic, but you have to state what are the products I'm looking for. It may seem simple, but if that identifier is not linked, it will be difficult for a reviewer to know. So put the name of the product in there so people know what you're searching for. You also need to specify what are you looking for. If you have a product that are used for different things, one for diagnosis of something, for monitoring of something, for treatment of a disease in various parts of the body, you need to specify what are the clinical indications you're looking for in the search. Then you need to specify your search. When are you doing it? A date. This may be that it doesn't need to be, the exact date, but perhaps this was done in March 2015. And you will need that especially later on. There's a requirement that the clinical evaluation reports are living documents that are updated on a regular basis. Maybe every, I don't know, third year, whatever your quality system say. So it's very nice to have the date so you can go back and do the search again from that time point and forward, so you don't have to repeat anything. So the date is actually important. Who is doing it? What period are you covering in the search? That again is also so critical. One of the main things about this search protocol is actually demonstrating the process to the notified body. And the notified body will, in sample cases, repeat the searches based on your information. So you'll have to have enough information in here for the notified body to be able to repeat that in their offices. And hopefully they will get the same or similar results if everything is done well. You also have to specify where you find the information. What kind of sources are you using? In many cases, PubMed is enough. There are databases out there with more literature available that from a strictly scientific point of view might be better to search in, but these are usually databases where you have to pay to get access. PubMed is available, and it is widely accepted by the notified bodies to use PubMed. So unless you already have access to these databases, unless you have a specific product with a specific interest of some kind, I would just use PubMed basically. It is possible to use other kind of databases, specify them. This is just an example of how you can write this up. There's no requirement for a format, but you need to specify it. Also, at this event, a report database, use them. They are available in like the US and Australia. They are not available in Europe right now, but hopefully will be at some point. But again, list what you have done and describe why you have done it, or your rationale for doing this. Then you need to go into the nitty-gritty stuff of things and find out what am I actually going to search for. I need to have a strategy because I need to make sure that the data I capture covers it all. It covers my claims, covers the intended use. So you need to sort of, you can look at it like if you also would a clinical study, you need inclusion criteria, you need exclusion criteria. So the inclusion criteria could be like, okay, we need, there's a certain, it is hearing aids for a specific kind of, if they are specialized in a certain area or whatever, but it needs to be sort of, we want this to be covered, this specific product, this specific indication to be covered. Maybe we want to include neonates, children, adults, whatever it might be that are relevant for your product. That's an inclusion criteria. Maybe you want to exclude data. It can be that your product is intended to be used for a certain application, but there's a lot of data available where your product are being used for something experimental. That's great. Maybe you can use that in the future to see mark for a broader indication. But for the specific search you're trying to document here is the intended use that you have in your instructions for use. So if an investigator, for example, is using a product something completely different, he got a good idea, or he tried a specific, very special people with a very severe disease, something, that's not relevant for your product. You can exclude that data. You only need to focus on the specific indications you have under evaluation here. So you can exclude that. You also need to specify the focus of your search. So what are you looking for? If you have something, a brand new device, maybe you're interested in animal data. But if you have something, a Me Too product, something that has been on the market for many, many years, you have so much clinical data that basically, a study on rats is not that relevant. So maybe you want to focus on controlled clinical trials, randomized clinical trials, whatever. So that is specified in this section. And then you have your filters, where you sort of, I'm only going to look at human data, for example. That's a filter you can set up in PubMed. I'm only going to search for articles in English. There might be brilliant articles out there in Chinese, but I can't read them. So it's okay. It's okay only to use English. Maybe you can specify, I only go back 5 years, because 5 years ago the technology changed. So data that are older than that are basically useless for me today. So, but all of that are filters you can set up in PubMed. Once you do that, you define your search words, make sure you capture all your clinical indications, and then you do your search. Then you sort of look at the results and there will always be some that are like duplicates, something that is something completely different from what you are looking for. You exclude that by your exclusion criteria and your filters and all that. But you specify the reason for excluding the articles. Again, traceability is the key word here. You need traceability across the entire search. But you specify that in your search protocol. And then you have to do the actual appraisal. Appraisal is rating of data based on how good quality this data is. This is a system where we have tried to set up 6 questions here. First of all, was the data generated from the actual device? If it is, that's good. If it's an equivalent product, that's also good, but not as good. If it's a different product, it's not that good. So it's a rating scale. These are examples. You can use other questions, but these are sort of general and can be applied to most products. So basically you take every article you have selected, you apply these criteria, these questions to every article, you look at what's written in it, and you make this evaluation, and you put a number like this, the appraisal. For the first question, in the first here, an example could be, okay, we have a study with 620 patients. We have a clinical indication algorithm, breast, just an example. It can be anything. We know that the product you own is not the one that has been used in this article, but your equivalent product, your direct competitor it's by name. So that's a 2, because you know it's the equivalent product. So you rate that a 2. Then you go back. Question number 2. Application, was the device used for the same indication? You check the article. Is it the same indication? If yes, it's a 1. If it's somewhat the same, it's a 2, and if it's something completely different, it's a 3. So you go through this for all of your articles, and you get a score. Then you calculate based on the table at the bottom, and this is why I call it the engineer approach. This is getting numbers on it, so you don't have to do much thinking. Just put the numbers there. And it can make it easier. So you score it based on this formula that you can see on the second table here, and it gets a relative weight. Okay? Then you calculate your weights. You multiply them, these numbers. And when you do that, you get a compounded weight between 0 and 1. And that compounded weight can then be interpreted. If it's a 0, it's a very poor match to your product. Basically, it's not useful. If it's a 1, it's just the best. So if you have an article that is rated as a 1, you know you need to include it in your clinical evaluation report. If it's a 0.5, it's very strong evidence. This means that it's most likely your product or an equivalent. It's the same indication, it's the same patient population, it's a good strong data with a good outcome that are statistically significant. That's good. So you do this for all of the articles you have selected, and then you evaluate, okay, I won't use data that are only weight as 0 or 0.06 or 0.125. I will only use the strong ones. And then you show, this way you show, okay, I've done this appraisal and I have included the strongest evidence I could find. And this will also help you narrow down, if you have 800 articles, this will help you narrow it down to a more limited amount of articles that you can work from. And you have demonstrated to the notified body that you have done this appraisal, which can be, as I said, a little bit tricky to demonstrate. And you just need to get these scores under your skin and work with them, and then it's sort of a nice, straightforward way of doing it once you get the system under your skin. So this was it for me. Just a very quick way of getting by something a little bit tricky that will need some working on, but it's doable. Is there any questions? Yeah.
I didn't understand why. It's not clear to me why you're doing this to begin with. I understand that you need to define a strategy, but is this necessary to get a CE mark? Is this to do the human testing? Or?
This is for your CE marking. It's a requirement in the directive that you need to do a clinical evaluation report. There's a method guidance out there that describes how to do that. And one of the things that you have to do as part of that process is to rate your data. You have to evaluate all of the data that you find based on a scientific approach. This is the same. This is something. Appraisal of data is also done if you are doing the big meta-analysis and all of that, where you really need a hardcore clinical evidence. There, your appraisals might be much more specific, much broader. You have much more criteria, but you need to do this in some way. So this is a sort of trying to boil it down to something manageable. Yeah.
Yeah. So not to be specific about my device, but we're just measuring glucose.
Mm-hmm.
And without glucose, you die.
Yeah.
So you need to measure it.
Yeah.
Like how, of course, if they need us to do a systematic search and evaluation, we'll do that. But it's like, this is in textbooks. This is not, you don't need to go to PubMed to find this.
No, but you need to, it's not only the application as such. You're absolutely right. You need glucose. But what you need to focus on in your clinical evaluation is your device. How does your device work? How does your device work compared to others? What is unique about your product? Have you documented the safety and performance of your product, of the unique features of your product? You need to do that. And in order to do that, you need clinical data. And clinical data can be generated from a clinical study, or it can be generated by other means, but it needs to be data generated from humans. And there's the choice to use literature. If there is a product out there that are competitive to yours, maybe you can show that yours are equivalent to some degree. And this is where the people doing clinical evaluations always conflict with the sales and marketing. Because from a clinical evaluation point of view, you need to demonstrate that our product is exactly the same as the competitor in the best of worlds. While the sales people are saying it's completely different. It's so much better. So, but this is the balance you have to find. So that needs to be your focus of your report. To demonstrate the safety and performance of your device using data from humans to say, okay, we know this is a risk. We can see from our competitors, this has been on the market for 20 years. We have no reports of that happening. Or this risk has been identified, so I'm dealing with that in my risk analysis. I'm doing a test. I've changed the materials to something else or whatever. So see it from a device perspective. Yeah. Any other questions?
I think our experience was that when we tried to make this literature search, that we really tried to find words that would eliminate as many articles as possible.
Yeah.
Because we have to, again, demonstrate something which is just first page. And it struck me that an auditor might think that it's too obvious that we are, eliminating these things.
Yeah.
Would an auditor ever comment on that?
I think,
you know what I'm...
Yeah, yeah. I think most notified, but in the ideal world, you would need every kind of evidence, pro and against and all of that. But I think that everybody knows that in the real life, you need to set the limit somewhere because you have other things you need to do. You cannot write this report for the next 5 years, right? So it's acceptable. It is acceptable that you need something manageable. As I said, you don't need too little. You need enough, but you don't need to overdo it because then you will never finalize this report. This will go on for hundreds of pages and you will have to write it up for month after month.
It doesn't add value at all?
No, it doesn't add value. But you need to have that value of demonstrating your device safety and performance. That's it. And then you have to stop it there. Because this can be research and that's something else. And in most companies there's no time for doing, basically, there's no time for doing research in a daily life. Because you have other stuff you need to do. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
So your appraisal is to find out what to include in your clinical evaluation. Because usually we look at our inclusion-exclusion criteria and we say, okay, we end up with this many we put in the clinical evaluation, and then we start to appraise them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we sort of write the most important data shows blah, 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 the less important shows blah, blah, blah. That's usually the way.
Yeah, but you have this is a sort of the second. You have done your intellectual criteria. You have found your mass of articles that could be relevant, and that you are ranking. So it's sort of and if it's a 0, as I said, there's no need to do much more about it, basically. No. So it's sort of you reduce it even further, but you have that mass of articles. You have that pile of articles.
It's an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah. So, but what you bring on and further analyze is, okay, this came up in the search, but we have evaluated, we have made an evaluation, a critical evaluation of the data and found that it's really not that good. Yeah. So
because a lot of the literature that comes up is really not that good.
Exactly. So it's in my search. Yes, I have identified it in my search. It could be relevant, but I'm choosing not to go any further. Yeah. And I'm doing that based on a scientific approach. Yeah. Okay. That is the end of my talk.
Yeah. What about Hannah and Tona? Do you have any questions for Rikke?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
But thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that's the end of the presentation.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.